It's fun to win at a personal level. It's fun to drop the one-liner and everybody says, "Ooh," and that ends the meeting. And so because it's fun and because it's rewarded by employment, by promotions, by, HR, that becomes the prevailing ceiling for people.
Welcome to Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of organizational culture, and more specifically, how leaders can build a truly great one. To help us unpack that, I'm joined by Dr. Dave Logan, professor at the University of Southern California's Marshall School of Business and co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Tribal Leadership, among other books. Dave's groundbreaking research into how tribes form and operate within organizations has influenced leaders across industries worldwide. If you're looking to build a strong, values-based, and high-performing culture in your organization, this is the episode for you. Dave, thank you for joining me today on the Science of Leadership.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be here.
Well, let's start at the beginning. In tribal leadership, you describe 5 cultural stages that exist within organizations. For listeners unfamiliar with your work, can you explain what a tribe is in this context and briefly describe those 5 stages?
Yeah, sure. So we're all familiar with the idea of just our people, like our people at work. So if you were at an airport and you saw someone you worked with, you'd go over and say hi. They are in your quote unquote tribe. So these things have always been there, but they kind of baffle people in organizational theory. And as you said in the intro, I am, among other things, a business professor. We think of departments and organization charts. And so we get out our pen and we move this person over here and we expect all these things to change. But the same people are going to have lunch with the same people. Maybe the conversation will change. There might be some drift, but a tribe is, again, it's this informal network. And the fundamental argument in the book is tribes are all around us. If you're in a big company, you're at a university, tribes are everywhere. And we don't often look for them, especially from a management or leadership lens, but they are the most powerful force in any organization, for profit, nonprofit, government, makes no difference. They are the most powerful force. And if you want to see that, I was just talking to somebody before jumping on here that announced very high profile company, one of the bigger ones in the country, bigger ones in the world. And they announced a global reorganization and everybody's trying to figure out what it means. Here's what it means. Nothing. It means people have new business cards. If you have a meeting of your direct reports, different people show up, but that's about it. The same gossip channels are going to function. The same sense-making things are going to function. The same friendships are going to function. And none of that is going to solve the fundamental problem, which is this particular organization doesn't know what it stands for. So
Mhm.
that's what a tribe is. And then in terms of the stages, we are relabeling them from stage to level. And I can explain that when we go on, but it just goes from everything you don't want to everything you do. So what we said in the book was stage one. We're now calling it level one. The sort of generalized conversation that people have at level one is that life sucks. There's something existentially wrong. And sometimes we try to take our experience in the United States and we kind of flatten it. But this is like lawlessness. When this happens in companies, people go to jail, often for a very long time. And so it's a violation of core values. So if I'm in this tribe, I believe that in order to keep my job and provide for my family, I have to violate the principles that are most dear to me. That's level one. That doesn't happen very often. So only about 2% of the tribes, the employed tribes that we found, express that life sucks nature. Okay, level two is not life sucks, but my life sucks, which may sound like a subtle difference, but it's massive. So here, I live in Los Angeles. People are stuck in traffic all the time. You're late for a meeting, your life sucks. And you walk in and you feel burdened and you're in a bad mood. So when you get a tribe of people that is that way, then innovation is going to go to basically zero. People will do the minimum to not get fired. And in some industries where the change is just overwhelming, like healthcare right now, there's a lot of this level two. So that's my life sucks. Level three is the big one, meaning it's the most common one that you find in organizations. And the theme of it is I'm great and you're not. So I'm great and you're not. And it's easy to think of from sports or from, since I do a lot of work in consulting and management consulting, I'm the best consultant. I'm the best professor. Someone thinks that they're the best baseball player. They're the best pitcher. And of course, being in Los Angeles, I have to say we have all of those here, right here. But in organizations, that becomes a real problem because as you're talking about leadership, 3 on down, there is no leadership. So at
Mm,
3, it's, "Tom, you have your opinion, I have my opinion, I'm gonna tell you why you're wrong, you're gonna tell me why I'm wrong." We might make it funny, but it's gentle put down, let me play devil's advocate, let me restate my idea. It's an I, me, my fest. But there's no leadership. Level 2, there's no leadership because the conversation is, "This sucks," right?
yeah,
And at level 1, you get this kind of absolute despair. So then level 4 is where actual leadership shows up, and that's, "We're great, and they're not." So a tribe by its nature, it doesn't grow forever. It gets 20 to about 150 people. And so, again, you think of a sports team, whoever they're playing that day is not great. And then level 5, as high as it goes, is, we call it, Life is Great, or in a rewrite, my co-author for this very talented person named Ashley Rodriguez, we're thinking of kind of reframing it as like anything is possible, but it's where the adversary becomes more of an idea or a thing. So when the world united around COVID, it wasn't, "We're great and this other country isn't great." It's that we have to get ahead of this COVID thing. We have to get ahead of smallpox, right?
yeah,
Decades before.
yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, well, that's a great summary of that. Thanks a lot. For those who, are listening, I have, my copy I read years ago, and I think it's a really good book, which is why I wanted to have Dave on the podcast. But as you were talking, I was thinking about James Carr's work, Infinite Games, and so on, and thinking about it kind of in that with the levels, in the sense that there's no in a sense, there's no game. It's lose-lose at the
Yeah.
bottom, right? And then at some point you get to win-lose, I win, you lose. But then at that top level, it's win-win. It's the infinite game. We're all in this and we can all do well,
Right.
kind of thing. So anyway, that was coming to mind. But I really appreciate you delineating those, and so that we can frame the conversation. I know you've consulted with a lot of high achieving organizations. To further put it into context our listeners can really understand, do you have a story that you could share of an organization that frames what a level 5 culture really looks like?
Yeah, I mean, it's an older story now, but it's still a great one. There was a consumer electronics show, I think it was in 2000, and a speaker, very well-known person in technology, it's a name we all know, gave this speech, laid out this model for how everything was gonna function, and it was gonna be in a hub structure. So it was before the iPhone, but your phone like that connects to your computer connects to the cloud. Again, it was before the watch, but the watch connects to the phone, and so it's this hub structure. And Steve Jobs wasn't there. Steve Jobs didn't give it, but he read it and said, "Oh," and I'm not going to say the word, but it starts with an S, ends with a T. Um, they're right. It was Bill Gates who gave the speech. We can't let them do it. They will mess it up. And so
Sounds
Apple's
like
focus
Jobs.
became that speech that Steve Jobs gave, I believe it was 2000 at the Consumer Electronics Show, and they did it. But think about that. Who was the competition? It wasn't really Microsoft. It was about the future of technology. And above all, it was this concept of mediocrity. We can't allow technology to be ugly and mediocre. We need it to be beautiful. And the famous stories, about the iPhone. But in particular, remember, we don't write about companies, we write about tribes. And so the design tribe at Apple, with Johnny Ive when he was there, and Steve Jobs was far sicker than a lot of people knew. Just look at what came out of that group in a very short period of time. Designs that really have changed the world. So, that would be a model. If you want one that's a bit grander, the story has not been told of Operation Warp Speed, which was, and I'm nonpartisan. Okay, I got friends on both sides, but it started under the Trump administration. Alex Azar was the Health and Human Services Secretary. In terms of just the virus, I mean, producing vaccines, it happened in about one-fifth the time, and then obviously it was the Biden administration that handled the implementation, and so there's plenty of good to go around. But when you sort of think about that time, the world came together. It was public-private partnerships. You had Pfizer sitting down with companies that normally they would have been, yelling at, and all that just went away because of this global emergency. But right where we are right now, and you can tell I work in healthcare, whoever figures out how to take care of Americans well for less money in a way that both Americans and their care providers like, that will be level 5, and everything in healthcare will change.
I mean, Kaiser Permanente has been trying to do that. I think they've made some headway with that, certainly. But I think that you're right. I think in healthcare generally, it is the occasionally maybe level 4, but a lot of level 3, I think, in there,
Yep.
having spent my career in that space. So yeah, I think which brings me to a question. I think that you've said that most organizations kind of get stuck at level 3.
Mhm.
Why is that stage a cultural ceiling, I guess, for so many?
Well, there's a couple reasons. One just has to do with how our economy functions, including education. We're all into education. But yeah, like I often tell the story. Let's say that someone decides to go back and get their MBA. So what they'll say to their friends, especially if they've been knocking back a couple beers, is, "Wow, you think I'm amazing now? You just wait until I get my MBA." And then 2 years later, if it's a 2-year MBA, just imagine that same conversation and same group of friends. Maybe they work together, and one of them says, "Hey, we've got this strategy problem that we're trying to handle at work." And the friend says, "Whoa, whoa! I took strategy. I took over somebody really famous. I did a test. I got an A. Bring it on." And then how does that person get a job at the end of their 2-year MBA? The way that most business schools, most universities, most books will teach you how to do it is SAR, situation, action, result. So if I'm interviewing for, if I'm, if you're the hiring manager,
Mhm.
you say, "So tell me about a time when you face an obstacle." And I say, "Well, there was this one time that everything was messed up. Everything was messed up. We didn't have good records. Our team was messed up. We couldn't get stuff out the door. And so I, the hero of the story, came in and I did this and I did this and I did this and I did this. And you know what resulted? Records were great. We got everything done on time, under budget. So I would look back on that as just a wonderful time. And if I've convinced you that I'm better than the other candidates, then I get the job. So then I go in the company and how do I communicate? I think, well, Tom's a pretty good judge of character. How did I win over Tom? It was all these great stories. Stories about who? About me. And
Right.
so what do I do in meetings? I drop the me card. But the other reason is it's fun to win at a personal level. It's fun to drop the one liner and everybody says, "Ooh," and that ends the meeting, or it just becomes so obvious that you're the smartest person in the room. So I don't know if it's a dopamine hit or something else. I'm not a physician, but there's just a psychological and probably a neurochemical reward that
Mhm.
we get for being that person, right? And so because it's fun and because it's rewarded by employment, by promotions, by, HR, that becomes the prevailing ceiling for people.
Yeah, and so, yes, it is, typically neuroscience, a dopamine rush, if you will, to have that happen, so you're right on with that. But thanks for sharing that, that makes a lot of sense. It is this scenario of, you know, in Gardner's book on leadership,
Mhm.
he talks about how people spend their whole lives basically pirouetting in front of a judge, right, as a single person to achieve, to and that's our society is that way. I mean, we're an individualistic society here in the US, and so it is me focused, and we get rewarded for that, right? We go to the best university, we go to the best medical school, the best residency to what or whatever field somebody's in, based on what we have done as an individual, and then we get into these positions, and we keep functioning that way, and it has negative repercussions, so that that makes sense from a sort of psychological and sociological standpoint. Dave, if you had to give somebody 1 or 2 reasons why building a great culture is so important for success, what would you say?
First, it's intuitively obvious for anyone that's been in a great culture and for anyone that's been in a bad culture. And for most of us, we have both of those experiences. So I didn't get in this business trying to study culture. That's not what my dissertation's on. I was there to study process. It was the 90s. Bill Clinton was president. The Berlin Wall fell. I did my doctorate at USC, same place I teach now. And so my thought process was pretty simple. Whoever's got the best process to get things done is going to win. And because the DoD wasn't writing big checks, these companies had to retool for the market, the for-profit market. So they had to do that really quick. And I just assumed whoever had the best process was going to get there first was going to win. And that's not what the data said at all. The data said the best culture wins, not the best process. Because if you've got a good culture and you give them a bad process, they'll either make it work or they'll fix it. But if you give a bad culture, which would be like level 3 or below, a great process, they'll mess it up. So it is what matters the most. And so Ashley, my business partner, and I, we talk about COGS. And anyone who has an MBA knows that COGS stands for cost of goods sold, but this is the leadership COGS, so different COGS. And its culture is the first one. It's primary, meaning start there. And also it is the most important because if you get culture right, you can get the others right. If you don't get it right, then the others will get messed up. O is operations, so that's systems, processes, things like that. G is governance, so that's the formal structure. and then S is strategy. And normally we flip it and say, start with strategy. And then if we have time, we'll get to culture. But our meetings always run long. So that one just gets infinitely delayed.
Mhm.
So that's the answer. If you have a good culture, anything is possible. If you have a bad culture, almost nothing is possible.
Yeah. So I think that there's so much other work that people have done that really resonate with that show, yeah, a terrible culture goes a long way in screwing up just about everything. What's the risk of an organization really being stuck at that level 3? I mean, it's easy to see what it would be for 1 or 2. What's the risk for those again, since most seem to get stuck there, what is the big risk or multiple risks, I guess, for them to get stuck there?
Well, there's a bunch. One is that you're not going to have optimal performance if you just think back to, sorry to go down the sports road, but if you think of Michael Jordan and the Bulls, he
Mhm.
was one of the best, maybe the best player of all time. And so you gave him the ball and he would shoot and score because he was great and you're not compared to him, right?
Yeah.
Why is that model flawed? He could get injured. He could decide to not play. He could get the yips. Remember the Ted Lasso quote.
Uh-huh.
All sorts of bad things could happen. So what's the alternative? The alternative is you empower the entire team. And again, on the basketball front, I lost track of how many Olympics ago it was, but the US lost to Lithuania. Like, how does that happen? I mean, this is our sport. We got
Yeah.
several. This is one of our sports.
Right.
We lost to Lithuania. And if you kind of look back at the video of it, we clearly had better talent, but they had a better team.
Mhm.
Now, if my wonderful 16-year-old daughter plays volleyball, if her team were to go up against an Olympic grade or professional volleyball team, they would get crushed because high talent is going to crush. Um, but it seems like in corporate America, we've put so much currency on the individual. Like in the reorg that I mentioned that I read
Mhm.
just before, getting on here, is we're going to take this person and we're going to move them here. And this person is now here. And this person reports to this person. And the whole thing is like it involves maybe 5 people, but when you cascade it down, it affects hundreds of thousands. But that's just not where the magic is. And in the United States, we're a relatively young culture. Certainly, we're the oldest constitutional democracy, but we're a fairly young culture. You go to other places in the world, and they understand this. In South Africa, I spent a lot of time there. There's this phrase, a lot of people know it now, Ubuntu. It's
Mm.
I am that we are. So my sense of who I am is derived from the we, and the I contributes to the we. And I'm not going to do spoilers for anybody, but season 3 of White Lotus ends with that idea. That's all I'm going to say.
I'm sure the viewers out there for White Lotus appreciate you not, spoiling it for them. Hey, I'm breaking into the podcast conversation here to share with you an exciting announcement. If you've been following the Science of Leadership podcast for a while, you've heard me talk about the book I've been working on. Well, I'm delighted to share that after over 3 years of work, my book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, is finally available. I'm so proud of this book and what it represents. I'm certain that you're going to find it immensely interesting and helpful as a guide on your journey to becoming a better leader. Seriously, you don't want to miss this book. I'm including a link to the book in the description. I hope you'll order your copy today. And please share it with others who might be interested. Also, please be sure to share your thoughts about the book with me. Now, let's get back to this interesting conversation on the science of leadership. In tribal leadership, you argue, and it makes sense, but that transition from level 3 to level 4 is the most important cultural leap a
Uh-huh.
team or organization can make. Could you walk us through how a leader can facilitate that shift?
Yeah, again, it's probably helpful to look at specific ones. So I mentioned Michael Jordan. So
Mhm.
his coach wrote a book. It was called 11 Rings, and that was 11 championship rings that he won. He'd won, I think, another two as a player. He was a good player, wasn't a great player, but again, the book is 11 Rings. And Phil Jackson, the author of the book, the first chapter is a summary of tribal leadership, which was cool to see. And then the rest of the book, he goes through the rest of the story of his time coaching the Bulls and then Lakers, and he would refer to somebody like that's a stage 3 individual. But it like the turnaround moment started with Michael Jordan. And he then kind of he said, as I said in the first chapter, there was a summary of tribal leadership. He said talking about his leadership style as a coach was to move the Bulls from a stage 3, I'm great, you're not, to stage 4, we're great, they're not. Stage 3 is about the I, stage 4 is about the we. And then he went into how difficult that was going to be. And then the section ended with my first conversation was with Michael. So that's how you have to do it. You go to there's usually a person that is deriving so much psychological, neurological pleasure out of being the best. Sometimes it's an illusion, but sometimes they actually are the best. That you've got to change the conditions of how that team operates. And in the case of the Bulls, one of the tactics that they came up with that Michael Jordan hated is he was only allowed to score a certain number of points per half. And as soon as he scored one more than that, he got benched. It didn't matter how good he was. It didn't matter what the score was. That's the deal. And so what do if you're getting close to that number and you're Michael Jordan? You start passing. And
Yeah.
that was the famous triangle offense, which is build the team, build the team, build the team. And that was when the Bulls became the most winning team in NBA history. And then the coach came out here to LA and did it again with the Lakers. So if you just kind of think about that as a model, but then I appreciate your question is more than just tell a story. The two hallmarks of stage 4, level 4 that are missing at 3 are commitment to shared values. So if you and I both share a commitment to, it might be informing people, it might be education, it might be health, right? Those are all values. Then it's not that something is important to you, something is important to me, but those things are important to both of us. And so if that were in charge, like health were in charge, or people getting the absolute best information, if that were in charge, then what would we do that we're not doing? And at that point, the pronoun shifts from I to we. So don't go after the pronoun, go after the commitment. And the second hallmark is the idea of a triadic relationship. And so it's not just two people, it's three, where one person is the keeper of the space between the other two. And again, if you go back to 11 Rings, there are tons of stories about triads. The whole triangle offense is, you got the ball from someone and then you've got to send the ball to someone, not just back to the same person. So it's a constant conversation, if you will, between three people. So when you can get those two hallmarks in place, the culture will shift from 3 to 4.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, and also for kind of endorsing Phil Jackson's 11 Rings. It's upstairs on my shelf in the collection of to be read soon books. So you've motivated me to actually read it. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Well, do you have any scientific data regarding the value of creating a great culture that might be able to share with us?
So at the time we did tribal leadership, it was the biggest study of cultures done at the time. Technology has come a long way. There have been several much larger studies. The most interesting one was done by, I'm going to blank on the names. It was done by finance professors, so not organizational behavior people, but finance at Duke and I think Columbia. And it was a survey, I believe, to about 1,800 corporate CEOs and C-suite people. And one of the questions that they asked on the survey is if you were to buy a company that was widely known to have a bad culture or poor culture, what would be the discount rate? Right, because finance people think of discount rate. So
Yeah.
if my phone is broken, well, I shouldn't pay full price. I should get at least half off because it's broken. And to their shock, the answer was not 10%, 20%, 30%. It was, I wouldn't buy the company for any price. And then when
Mm.
they asked some additional details, people said, because I did it once. And we almost didn't recover as a company. The whole leadership style of Jack Welch at GE has been pretty thoroughly discredited. The idea that you got a tail and every year you cut
Right.
off the bottom
Yeah.
10%. But even in his own writings, he said that single biggest lesson that he learned is do not acquire a company with a bad culture because the bad culture will seep into the larger organization, the acquiring organization, and it may wreck it. And that almost happened under Welch. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's scientific proof, but 1,800
Yeah. No,
C-suite executives came up with that conclusion.
that's good. Yeah. I think that there are a lot of studies that have absolutely shown that culture has a tremendous impact on performance, and negative cultures. Obviously, we can name so many Enron, Tyco, WorldCom, so many, right? Where they had these cultures that were just defective, if you will. I remember as you were talking, people saying, they wouldn't buy the company, they wouldn't be involved in that culture. I remember when I interviewed General Pete Pace, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, phenomenal leader, Marine, and he was talking about be careful about your organization and the culture of that organization because whichever one you join, you will become that. It will infect you, and so you have to ask yourself, is this the kind of person that I want to be?
Yeah.
And so I think that's another example. I think.
Well, and just to take that a bit deeper, one of the questions that comes up a lot is how do you define culture? And you ask 10 culture people, you're going to get 10 different definitions. So I'm not saying this is better than anybody else's, but I think it's an interesting one. Culture is the conversations that people keep having over and over. And so if at work, the conversation over and over is, I can't, we won't be able to do that. We tried that once, it didn't work. That will fail. They won't support it, whoever they is. Then that really does infect your mind and you start thinking that way. And your answer for anything becomes, I can't, that won't work, right? You become a naysayer. What I think is a lot more dangerous is the level three. This is maybe a little too personal, but I'll share it. I took a job once and my wife, who'd been married for 20 something years, at one point she said, I don't like who you're becoming at that company.
Mhm.
And I really had to think about that a lot. And I realized she was right. But the thing about the culture is everything was I. Everything was I. Everything was a personal battle. The way you got an idea through is you won this person over and then this person over, but then this person was going to go tell this person. And it was the worst possible kind of chess because the pieces were moving themselves.
Yeah.
And you could do it, but just the cost and who you had to become. And I would contrast that with a great level 4 or a great level 5 organization. You have more energy at the end of the day than you had at the beginning.
I think for those of us who've had the opportunity to be in a level 4, level 5 group, um, it is, this virtuous cycle upward, right?
Yeah.
Like, everybody gets pulled upward to that, whereas on the other end, it's this negative vortex that just pulls everybody down toward the bottom. Um, so that at the end, I think if we studied, I suspect, if we were to take a group of organizations and study them for a long period of time, 20, 50, 100 years, if they were to exist, probably what you would see is movement to the poles in those organizations.
Yeah, I have a colleague, Russ Gonnering. He's an ophthalmologist. He went through a master's program that I started for doctors many, many years ago. And I'm not going to represent his work well, but he it's kind of before AI, but he pre-programs an existent set of conditions, and then these agents, in the program sort of move, and then it's like, well, what do you do if people um, are sort of behaving in a static way, and you drop in an absolute tyrant, and what happens is everybody scatters.
Mhm.
Work fragments. They go to level two. Level two doesn't have a lot of relationships. With level three, it's, well, I got to have a relationship with you because I got to have to win you over. But it all just sort of fragments. I'm not sure it would go to the polls. I mean, an example, like you mentioned, Kaiser Permanente.
Mhm.
I've worked with them for close to 30 years through University of Southern California. They were a client of USC's when I became an assistant professor a long time ago, and they've had their ebbs and flows like everybody else. I do think that their economic model is interesting. They own hospitals, at least in California, and that can be a big real estate expense. But I don't believe in built to last. The Jim Collins idea,
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
just I don't see it. Like a company that I learned a lot from was Zappos, now part of Amazon. And if you're not familiar with it, Tony Hsieh, the CEO, the
Yeah.
last year of his life was not pleasant. I didn't know any of what was going on, but he was clearly dealing with addictions of all sorts and ended up dying in a house fire. That doesn't take away how amazing Zappos was when it was working, and I haven't had any contact with it since, so it may,
Yeah.
in fact, be working really well right now. But I think that's what we have to look for, is not a company that's gonna be great in 100 years or something that we're building for the next 25, but a place that right now provides such enormous opportunity for us to make a difference, to put a dent in the universe, the famous Steve Jobs quote. I mean, that's the joy of all this.
Yeah. Well, Dave, as we think about sort of making this practical for listeners, what is something that folks could start doing, today to help move or begin moving their culture forward toward that level 4 or even level 5?
Yeah, 3 steps, actions. Number 1 is listen. Just listen to how people around you are talking, and you'll be able to spot the dominant stage culture, level 2, stage 2, or 3 or 4. Just listen. And this next one surprises people. Join them. And that surprises people because, well, what about if it's stage 2? Everybody's complaining. Are you saying I should complain? Yeah. I mean, what else are you gonna do? Sit down and say, pound the table and say, "I'm tired of all these complaints." Or the ones that you and I probably run into is you join a group that's stage 3. A lot of professional groups are stage 3. A lot of industry groups are stage 3. And every once in a while, I'll sit down in a meeting and somebody will say, "I'm sorry, who are you?" And they're not being rude. They just don't know who I am. And you kind of have to play the stage 3 game. Well, I'm this, I have this degree, I wrote these books, I did this. And then finally they'll say, "Okay, got it. Good enough." In other words, you can stay. But if you immediately jump to, well, my core values and I want my eulogy to say that, they're going to kick you out of the meeting. So listen,
Mhm.
join, meaning actually join the conversation. And then 3, with respect and humility over time, model the next level. This is one of the reasons we changed stage to level. Plus, people in healthcare, stage 4 sounds
Right. Sure.
really
Yeah.
bad, right? But which means if people are at level 3, you begin modeling level 4, which means you start listening for values. You start noticing what triadic relationships you could start to set up, and you just begin doing it. So listen, join, and then with respect and humility over time, model the next level.
Yeah. A common thread that I hear in those 3 is actually respect,
Mhm.
because to listen to somebody, you're showing them respect.
Yeah.
Then you're respecting their conversation, and then you're respecting, by joining and then adding to it. So, I hear that in those 3. Thanks for sharing those. Those are great. I was wondering, for those who are stuck in a toxic or disengaged environment, do you have any hope or advice that you would offer them with regards to the culture?
Well, number 1, how is the culture compared to other places you might go? And that's a really difficult thing to figure out because if you go apply for jobs, people are just going to make things seem a lot rosier than it is. One of the, very simple messages that falls out of all this is have a lot of friends that you have very open, honest relationships with, and then talk to them about what it's like where you work. And unless they're braggarts and they're trying to make where they work seem better, they'll tell you honestly. It's one of the reasons, and as much as I kind of dogged education at the beginning, I'm a huge fan of education because people come together. It's not what the professor says that's important, excuse me, but what's vital is just the conversations that you have with the people in your class. And if you describe a situation and people look at you with horror and say, how do you live like that? That's a pretty good sign that there might be something, better. Reforming a culture is difficult, but it can happen. And that's the turnaround, that we all deal with. I've seen level 2 turn into 3, turn into 4 very quickly. So I wouldn't give up on it, but none of this is stuff you do alone. Leadership is not a solo sport, it's a team sport, right?
Yeah.
So find people. This is way not a I'm not trying to get people to buy books, but one of the really interesting things that happened with tribal leadership, the reason it did so well, is book groups began popping up in companies, and they would just meet at lunch, and they would read a chapter, and they talk about it, and they
Yeah.
change things.
Yeah. I think that's where it starts. Thinking about Joseph Ross's work, Leadership for the 21st Century, I think the innovative thing that he did with regard to leadership theory was that he brought out the reality that the led are as important for leadership as the person who is the leader. And so in this scenario, as you're describing it, those people gathering around and talking about this, they are leading, in a very real sense, as consistent with Ross's model.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of models that try to emphasize that the leader is not necessarily the one out front. The servant leader model is probably the most famous, but there's a science fiction reference, and I won't go into all of it. It's just describing this alien society that a being in that world that supported another was considered to be behind them, right? I'm supporting you. And the ultimate leader was called the hindmost one because they were behind everyone, supporting everyone. So it's not the person out in front, it's the hindmost one. I happen to love that phrase.
Yeah. Well, Dave, before we wrap up our conversation, I'm wondering, how has this idea of shaping and using culture impacted your leadership?
It's a good question, and you shot me the questions in advance, so it's a good one. It's one I've been thinking about. The first thing is it makes you really aware of your own behavior and the part of your behavior that you may not like. And for most of us, we use I, me, my all the time, right? Here's what I think. Well, let me take your idea and let me play devil's advocate with it. It expands your awareness, and that's not entirely pleasant, is probably the best way to say it. That's number one. Number two is you begin to notice why some people are the word success is kind of tainted. It's, like who drives the best car or
Right.
has the best
Yeah.
house. But when you look at people that have made a really huge contribution, how have they done it? Right. You're talking about the science of leadership. And it's indirect. It's not, I am going to be hard charging and make everyone conform to me. It's not that person. It's the person that develops others. And then by virtue of having developed others, things become a lot easier. The last one I'll say is our country, I think our world is at a time, of great division. I went out of my way with one of the early anecdotes to say something that positive that happened under the first Trump administration. You can weaponize any of this material. And
Mhm.
I've had people on both sides of the aisle say, oh, I get it. You know what? My group, the Democrats are at 4 and those stinking Republicans are at 1, or like vice versa. Like,
Yeah.
stop. The thing to do is go find somebody who doesn't agree with you. Don't go tell them why they're wrong. It has no impact other than it pisses them off. And just listen and ask questions. Ask
Yeah.
questions of humble curiosity without any attempt to influence, just to listen. And when we can bring in all of those experiences, that's where you get the real level four. Level four is not everybody who thinks just like me. That's clones. But real level four is, here I'm going to use a word that's not entirely popular today. It's diversity in every sense of the word. It's men, women. It's people who have PhDs or doctorates, people who didn't graduate high school. It's people who were born in Burma next to somebody who was born in New York, but all of that, age, what people studied. And when you can bring a group like that together and then find values that coalesce that highly diverse group, that's when the magic happens. It's not an army of clones.
Yeah. Well, Dave, I think that's a great way to end out our conversation. It's really been a pleasure to get to catch up with you. Thank you for sharing, your insights and for the incredible work you've done helping leaders create culture that really, I think, bring out the best in people. And thank you for joining me on the Science of Leadership today.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.